All right, everybody, welcome back to the Three View Mirror, the podcast that helps you look back in time while still moving forward in this crazy world. Each week, you'll join us, me, my two co-hosts, and sometimes a special guest, as we bring up three seemingly unrelated random topics that by the end of the show, we hope we've given enough clues that you can piece them together in a way that makes sense. Now, the other thing about this is the host every week is the only one that knows how these three things tie together. And today, I'm fortunate enough to be our host. I'm John Cotrides, better known as Gen X Jono in my social media platforms, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and I'm joined by two amazing friends and co-hosts.
Hi, I'm Chelle, better known as Gen X Chelle across Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
And I'm Chris Clues, better known as Chris Clues. I am a keynote speaker and author that focuses on the work and life lessons that we can learn from the greatest decade in pop culture, the 80s.
Welcome to the Three View Mirror podcast. All right, guys, today I've got three topics that I don't know if they could be more seemingly random than they are. You ready to hear them?
Yes.
All right. Barry Manilow, Blossom, and Seinfeld.
Wow. Okay.
So Barry Manilow is my
I love
70s. Seinfeld, we're topping off, finishing up with, I'm letting that hit my 80s, even though it was 89. And then in the middle, we've got Blossom. I'm going to get her name wrong every time we talk about it. You can do it, Chelle, I'm sure.
Mayim Bialik.
There it is.
Yeah.
But we're going to start with Barry Manilow. So I want to know what you guys know and if you're Fanilows.
I'm a fan of Low. I've never heard
either.
Barry Manilow fans, that's what they called. Barry Manilow fans are very loyal and dedicated Fanilows.
I mean, Lady Gaga at least got, I like hers better, like Little Monsters. That's a little better than Fanilows, yeah.
A fan of Low. Okay. Copacabana. I don't think that there's any more of a elevator song that I could possibly think of than Barry Manilow. Barry Manilow in general is like the elevator music now. I hate to say it. I mean, not that he wasn't great and isn't still, but that's what I hear in an elevator is do, 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 do.
Well, unfortunately for all of us, the elevator music is also like the Thompson Twins and Bon Jovi and yeah.
Barry Manilow was elevator music back then. So, I mean, that was the original elevator music. To Chris's point, now we're hearing Metallica and elevators and in Target. I'm like, so that's changed a little. Chris, what Barry Manilow songs do you know?
I mean, the Copacabana is the one that just
Mandy?
Like, totally. I know that he was Mandy, but wait a minute. This was a song I listened to because my dad used to listen to on 45. I write the songs.
That's a huge one. So here's the deal. You may not know every Barry Manilow song, but when I started doing some research, I was really surprised that there are certain songs he wrote that I think you guys will absolutely know, starting with this one.
I am stuck on
Band-Aid, stuck on me. Yeah.
I am stuck on Band-Aid.
Oh, yeah.
I did know that he was a jingle writer. I did know
jingle writer.
Yes, he wrote a lot of the famous jingles of the day. I can't come up with them off the top of my head. I can't just name them. Just like I can't name some of his songs either, off the top of my head. But I bet you I could sing along with just about any song or jingle that you put up that he did.
So he also wrote the jingle for McDonald's, You Deserve a Break Today. He was the guy that
did he really?
wrote, yeah. Like a Good Neighbor, State Farm is There. Yeah.
Wow.
I came across that info in some other random thing that I was looking up one time was about all the things that he was involved in behind the music.
And the reason I really brought him in, aside from the tie-in, is for me, as much as music, and Chris always talks about music and soundtracks from movies and how those are the backdrop, the musical backdrop of our young lives, commercials were too. Commercial jingles like plop plop fizz fizz, oh what a relief it is, and those play on repeat in my head, and they're a huge part of nostalgia for me in a way that I'm almost afraid pharmaceutical commercials are going to be for our kids someday, because they're the only
Oh,
ones
no.
still doing
Yeah.
good jingles.
Yeah. Big Red. I could still sing the Big Red song.
So
You
kiss
remember
a
the
little
Big Red?
longer.
Yeah. Kiss a
Yeah.
little longer. Hold tight a little longer. Stay close a little longer. I
mean,
can't sing.
no, not
Yeah.
Oscar Mayer.
I'm an Oscar
Didn't
Mayer.
you see Oscar Mayer as well?
What's that? No, but I mean, when talking about the
Really?
broader thing of jingles, I can guarantee you I can name 10 and we'll all start singing.
Mm-hmm. Because and they were, I mean, we were forced to sit down and watch commercials, and I could see why the jingle is dying, and mostly it's because nobody's watching the commercials anymore. So
Yeah.
if they don't get you in that first 2 seconds, you're pressing skip on YouTube, then that's exactly why jingles aren't a thing. And we had to sit there.
And now the younger generations probably think that these 80s songs that are being used for commercials are actually jingles. I'm like, no. It came out in 1984. It's a real song. Somebody didn't create it in a lab in last year. Like, this is a real song.
Jingle writing was an art. It was a well-paid job. And I remember I watched 2.5 Men. That was like Charlie Sheen's occupation. That was one of my favorite sitcoms. He was a straight philandering Barry Manilow, basically. That's what he did, and got paid really well to do it. And they used to get awards for these. Barry Manilow won awards for his jingle writing. He wrote songs for other artists as well. Some of the songs, that we hear, not music that I like, he wrote for Melissa Manchester and other artists that didn't really strike me as being somebody I listened to, but he did a lot of that. And then the catalog of music, again, not something I listen to personally very much, is unbelievable. The man did write the songs and the jingles, and he did it constantly.
And that's why I said you could probably pull up any song and we'll all know just at least a few words for it because he was so pervasive. But my question for you, John, since you did all the research, is when did he really exit the scene? I know he probably continued in the, behind the scenes. When did he stop being the singer and become more of the musician?
He never did. He's still out there producing music. He's still out there writing. He's still out there performing. He just recently, in the past 5, maybe 10 years, came out of the closet and announced to the world that he was gay and that he was in a relationship. And, the irony on that is, and I wanted to speak to it in a way that is respectful, but also to say that in the 80s and we didn't give a damn. Like when he felt he had to come out, I've got to say all of Generation X, were like, yeah, and like, we kind of had a clue. We kind of figured we didn't care, but it's in this day and age, he felt the need to come out and label himself that way because there's some flack for not coming out and labeling yourself because people feel that, oh, it's, why aren't you sharing that? And he has said in interviews, it just was part of my personal life. I didn't see that it was pertinent to my music or to my persona. And I think our generation and the generation before us, yeah, maybe it was tough to come out, but even more than that, there was just this, not this need to label who and what we were all the time.
I think we as a generation definitely would have been like, yes, so what? Very accepting. But in the 70s and 80s, I could see why people wouldn't, mostly because that could be career ending at that point. And we have to admit that those kind of things could have been career ending 60s, 70s, 80s. We could have rejected, they themselves could have had been rejected.
But do you think anyone didn't know? Like, would you have been shocked if he came out? Now, I guess to your point, maybe some would, because I remember some older women when I was growing up that were like in love with him. That were like, in fact, like, oh, Barry Manilow. And I remember as a younger person, when these older women at the time would say that, I'm like, yeah, I don't think so.
Well, they would swoon. Rock Hudson was a huge
Yeah.
person like that as well. People swooned for him, and that could end careers at that point. And like he said, he wanted to keep his personal and his professional life separate, and I highly respect that. But it's very nice that he has the space now to be able to say, "This is who I am," and always was. But because we've opened those spaces now.
Yeah, I mean, Freddie Mercury, George
Mhm.
Michael,
Mhm.
and then of course you had like Boy George. I mean, Boy George, I mean, it was pretty clear, I think, to everybody right from the start. But he positioned himself, his brand, a little bit differently than Barry Manilow did. And that, Freddie Mercury to a certain extent, maybe, I mean, his brand was just that he had the most amazing voice in the history of the world. You
Sure.
could have that debate, but I think he did.
Judas Priest,
Rob, Rob Halford.
Alfred.
Rob Halford. Yeah.
My
And that
brother-in-law
movie
was
Rockstar with Mark.
huge Judas Priest fan, enormous huge Judas Priest fan in the 80s and stuff. And I remember my wife relays the story where she told him, he's like, no way. And it's like, because you didn't know. We can say we knew. You said Boy George. I remember being a kid and kids at school saying he was gay and me being like, I don't think so. Is he? And now I look back, I'm like, how did I not get that? But you put the juxtaposition of him next to David Bowie, next to Prince, next to anybody.
Yeah.
And sometimes the lines blurred such that we didn't know. The hair bands, they were all wearing more mascara than the women. Aquanet that could burn a hole in the ozone layer. The lines were really blurry when we were growing up.
Go look at the the Poison album cover. Look who the cat dragged in. I mean, if you want an idea of like how much makeup those guys had on at the time, it was called glam. That's why they called it glam rock. It was glam rock. But yeah, Rob Halford, actually, that story, they changed it a little bit, but the movie Rockstar with Marky Mark or Mark Wahlberg and Jennifer Aniston, that was loosely based on that story of Judas Priest. I mean, pieces of it. So yeah, I mean, I like going back to Barry Manilow, but I think about like the jingles that you mentioned, but also some of his songs and how they've continued to pop up in pop culture, in shows and movies. Like Looks Like We Made It. I mean, I feel like I hear that song all the time.
Yeah.
In shows everywhere. It's a great song.
Yeah.
And I hear it all the time. I'm trying to think of where I've heard it recently because it just keeps popping back in my head. But it's everywhere, and that's what's great about Barry Manilow and his library of music.
You mentioned I write the songs. I can hear it. I can hear it playing. And I'm like, when it came out, I wouldn't have been that kid that would have listened to that kind of music. And yet I know every word because, to Chelle's point, we listened and watched what was on. If 98 PXY had Barry Manilow playing, maybe I could go over to 93Q, but I only had a couple options while driving in the car. Well, there weren't that many radio stations that came in clearly, and 9 times out of 10, you'd flip over and they'd be playing the same thing anyway.
Did you research the number of songs that what his catalog?
So between the songs that he wrote for himself and for others, would it surprise you to realize that he's credited with over 400 songs?
No, that doesn't surprise me at all. In fact, I was thinking it would be even more.
Really? I think that's a huge number.
It's huge, yes.
He's very similar to, I mean, I think about it in terms of course, like 80s. But, Prince, when you were talking about all the different things that he did, especially writing songs for others, I immediately started thinking about Prince. And I wonder, it would be interesting. You can't have this conversation with Prince today, unfortunately. But, with all the things that Barry Manilow was doing behind the scenes, was that an influence for Prince as well? Because he was writing, for the Bangles, Manic Monday, and Shaka Khan for Shaka Khan, Nothing Compares to You, Sinead O'Connor, and many others. But my mind immediately went to like, wow, there's just very few people, entertainers in history that are geniuses. I mean, you can put him at a genius level because of all the things that he did.
I was just thinking that when I feel sorry for the kids that now are going to go back and listen to their music 30 years from now, because I think some of the people now aren't necessarily musicians. They're not that creative genius as much as they are more of the show and the flash and the marketing. And Barry Manilow and Prince and many others, didn't need to be marketed. Their voice and their talent spoke for themselves. And I really hope that someday, and I know there are some good musicians now too that, are true artists, but I think we're getting watered down with it.
I mean, I put something out the other day about, how Milli Vanilli, I mean, they, what's happening today? Auto-tune and lip sync. Auto-tune just won the Grammy in 2023, the auto-tune technology. And in 1990, Milli Vanilli was stripped of their Grammy because of lip syncing, and you could argue maybe auto-tune. So yeah, I agree. I mean, they're out there, but I don't know, like very few and far between now.
The cool thing is, I think kids today are starting to embrace it, or maybe kids always have embraced it, but you'll see different artists from past generations, even before us, that are now starting to do duets with younger artists. You saw Elton John did something with Dua Lipa. And, I think that's really cool when it's cross-generational like that. It's interesting that we get skipped over. It always seems to be a boomer with a Gen Z artist. So Gen X seems oddly enough to be missing from the equation. This is as good a segue as any to move on from Barry. Sorry to any Manilows that were hoping this would be an hour-long segment, but we're going to jump to, unless Chris has something to say, or are you good?
I just wanted to wrap up with, we talked about the Copacabana, and the reason it's in my head is because I had friends on in the background earlier this morning when I was doing work, and Copacabana is in one of the episodes where the one where they go back to the wedding for her ex-husband, or the one that she didn't marry. What was his name? The dentist, orthodontist.
Barry.
Anyway, Barry. And yeah. And she sings Copacabana. Anyway,
It's just Michelle's point.
Another
it's prevalent.
Barry Manilow moment.
All the things that we bring up, they're not always going to be so obviously pertinent to pop culture. And yet Barry Manilow had a huge impact on pop culture, undeniably huge. We may not all be Fanilows, but we can acknowledge the huge impact he made. Like I said, for me, it was on the jingles. All right. Next, as far as things that made us laugh. Going into the 90s, and we'll circle back to the late 80s with Seinfeld at the end, but Blossom. And the reason I included the show is, Chris, it was something you actually said on a previous episode that we recorded about how Johnny Galecki got to do bigger things and move on from the movies that he did when he was younger. And I started thinking about young child actors, and often we've talked about it. They don't do well. They don't mature well in the business. That's why a lot of parents that were child actors don't want their kids anywhere near it. But there are a few that do really well and seem to bypass the hazards and the pitfalls. And Maya Bialik is a huge example of that, because Blossom was very much one of those sitcom family favorite hits that ran 5 or 6 years. It had Joey Lawrence in it. It had Ted Wass, just a couple of staples that we saw the same 90s sitcom kind of play out over and over again. And Blossom was one of those. And it had the best friend, and it had the cute boy, and it had but she was an atypical lead, I think, for what we would have seen as a teenage girl leading a show back then. What's your experience with the show? Or just, if not, I doubt very much, Chris, that you watched it weekly. Chelle, maybe. But again, as it entered into pop culture, what is your feeling around the show?
I have a tremendous amount of respect for her because she's an incredibly intelligent woman. After you learn a little bit about her as the child actress, then you realize she has, like, I don't know, a doctorate, double doctorate, something. Like, she was a highly intelligent woman. And but as far as the show goes, I can just remember the opening where she did her little dance in the beginning, and we always wanted to copy the dance. We always tried to copy the dance, but I remember thinking, she's so awkward. Like, she represented for me, like, you're so awkward, maybe I'm okay because I'm awkward too, or whatever it was. So she did a lot of that, I think, for the younger populations, was making it cool to be smart and kind of goofy and awkward.
Yeah. I mean, look, she has a PhD in neuroscience.
Yeah.
I think.
Yes. Something.
I mean, come on. Like, sometimes you see some of these people and you just think, how many, I don't know if I'm gonna put this the right way, but how many broken people were created before this person? Because this person just has it all. Like they just everything they did, they have it all, and there are just people like that. And she is one of them. And I didn't. You're right. I didn't really watch Blossom. It wasn't on my list. However, one of the shows I did watch that had a very similar character to her in terms of like their awkwardness and goofiness, but we loved him, was Urkel in Family Matters. And so, Blossom and Urkel were, different but similar in terms of the character themselves and being the protagonist of the show and being the one that we cheered for, but also being awkward. And I think that was a great theme in the sitcoms of the 80s and 90s. And I personally know her for Amy Farrah Fowler, and I just love that character. So, yeah, I'm a huge fan, and now the host of Jeopardy. I mean, come on, she's great.
To compare her with Urkel, for me, I have to slightly disagree about it because she, for me, seemed so much more genuine. This wasn't a forced acting thing because I will say, bless him for the role, but because we all watched it, but Urkel to me was incredibly fake and annoying, whereas Blossom had a genuineness to her. It is the truth. I hate to say it, but we're here on this podcast because it's 3 points of view, and I couldn't stand him, to be honest. But Blossom was real. That's how I felt.
You know where I'll come in when it comes to Urkel. I hated that type of character. That it's that whole Gilligan syndrome. Once again, the annoying, stupid character that just irked the hell out of me. And every time he said, "Did I do that?" I just wanted to throw a brick through the television set. But Blossom was endearing. She wasn't just awkward in the sense that you could be sitting there as a kid, with an awkward personality, with not knowing how to say the right thing or be the right person or engage properly in the cafeteria when you finally get to sit with the kids that maybe intimidate you a little. She had all of that. But physically looking at her, she was not anywhere near what we grew up watching, the young kids, the young girls. She says it. She goes, "I was a big-nosed Jewish girl." I mean, she was just a look we weren't used to seeing on television driving a show. And whether I watched it or not, I'm like, that is awesome for little girls all over the place. I love being able to see that. And then the cool, good-looking kids on the show, Six and Joey Lawrence, whoa, they were nowhere near as put together as she was. I actually did that whoa pretty good.
Yeah.
And I listened, she actually has now, she is on social media and she shares a lot of her knowledge of self because of her neuroscience and everything. She shares a lot of knowledge of self. And I find that fascinating and endearing too, because like you said, she didn't do like the big-nosed Jewish girl. She didn't look the role of the absolute, this was the days of the supermodels and the Cindy Crawfords and the Claudia Schiffers and such. This is not what she was. And to this day, she's still not that. She doesn't pretend to be anybody but her actual real and true self. And that is a highly respectable thing to have.
Yeah. Yeah, especially in that industry. And so, but she's in a small group, I think, of entertainers, celebrities, whomever that they have very high IQs and they continue to pursue their education. So, she continued to pursue her education into the 2000s, but you also have like Natalie Portman, who was like that as well.
So she did blossom and then took a break, went on to college. And to your, like you said, Natalie Portman did something similar. There was somebody else that did as well. I always think, what's it like being one of those college kids that's sitting there in neuroscience class or, an English 101, and all of a sudden you look over and there's, Blossom. It's got to be amazing that they still get to have that experience. Today, I think they'd be forced to almost do it online. I don't know that they could enter into a classroom and live a normal life.
Also, Brooke Shields, by the way, so Brooke Shields did that as well. Princeton. And then we talked about, at one point I had mentioned, what's his name? Dolph Lundgren, Drago, who had a very, one of this very exclusive scholarship to MIT, which he ended up, I think, not taking because of, got into Rocky IV. But yeah, so there's a small group of them. And she's obviously one that's front and center to Rochelle's point, she's out there on social media talking about self. And, I mean, the hosting of Jeopardy thing is just huge. And it's so amazing to see that too.
To go back to the point of the college, I think that anybody, though, that had a successful show like that has now got the money to pay. They're not going to, the state school, like they're not going to the, the community college. It's
Yeah, I think it's really honorable that you could be in a position where you have everything. There's absolutely no reason for you to have to go back and study and take tests and write papers, and they do it. And that's pretty awesome, I think.
I think she spoke to the fact that for her specifically, there was a reason. She needed to back away from the fame, the lights, the cameras. She needed to reclaim at that point in her life a little bit of normalcy, and then decide whether or not she wanted to go back to it. And before Big Bang Theory, she said that there was really some thought into, do I want to go back into this? And I'm glad she did, because she became one of my favorite characters on that show. She became my favorite character on the show. And if you watch her story arc, her personality changes drastically during the show. They took liberties. She was very stoic. No? Oh, I envy you not watching, because that means you can watch it from the beginning all over again and never. I think that I envy you being able to experience that.
I may have to do it. That and like The Office are two shows that I never made it to watching them. We talked about this before too. I got to put it on my list.
So Amy Farrah Fowler, I just want to expand quickly before we, if we're going to wrap up the segment here, I want to expand quickly on the Amy Farrah Fowler from Big Bang Theory, because what I read was that was not going to be an overly recurring role. I mean, they had her meet Sheldon on a dating site when they made the profile for him, and the audience loved her, which, by the way, is no surprise, right? To those people who were invested in Blossom back in the day, it's no surprise that she could get an entire global audience to love her and her character, which, again, says so much about her.
Well, and starting with her story arc again and how her personality changed, that's just another great example of her, this time in a majorly ensemble cast. These guys, Sheldon was a bit of a standout maybe, but in general, a very inclusive, equal friends type ensemble that went on, which exactly is what we'll talk about in the next segment. It works. And she was probably more her as Amy Farrah Fowler than she'd ever been, but I think Blossom was portions of her as well. I think she played a genuine role each time, to Chelle's point earlier, more so than Urkel ever could have been.
Hey, easy on my Urkel, man.
It was a bad analogy, dude. You need to be called out on these things.
I love Urkel.
No surprise.
Did I do that?
So we've talked about Barry Manilow. We moved over to Blossom. Now I want to talk about one of my favorite shows. And for those watching, I have a bunch of Seinfeld t-shirts. It's probably my favorite sitcom of all time. I remember the pilot being like the Seinfeld Chronicles. I just know a lot about this show. I love this show. I know all the lines. I've seen every episode. But what do you guys think?
I've seen every episode as well. And there's, the first thing, the funniest thing, we still say it every once in a while around here is, I'm out. That was one of my favorite lines from the whole thing, when he leaves the door for like 2 seconds and he's out. I loved it. Or that, yada, yada, yada over, I mentioned the bisque.
Yada yada over the best part.
Yeah, I mentioned the bisque.
I saw every episode of Seinfeld as well. I love it, and I love all the side characters. Also, I actually have a little tie to Seinfeld. A guy that I was a client of. He was a vendor for us when I was working at DHL the first time back in the early 2000s. His uncle was Uncle Leo.
Oh wow!
And I loved the Uncle Leo. I had no idea when we started talking about Seinfeld, and I just said one of my favorite characters is Uncle Leo, and so he sent me a picture of he and Uncle Leo together, and had like I got a happy birthday from Uncle Leo at one time. So I loved the one with the eyebrows.
Yeah, he played the same character. He played the same character later on, and Everybody Loves Raymond. It's a different name, but it was still him. All the side characters were amazing. I loved that Seinfeld created a language too. Like they had the close talker and the slow talker and the two-face and the man hands. It was just, and that's pop culture because that lived on. That jumped out of the episode and came into our lives. And I'd be hard pressed to think of a show before or since. The Office kind of did it too, I guess. But Seinfeld did it flawlessly. The Soup Nazi. It just goes on and on and on. And to Chelle's point, the contest. They had an episode about a topic that they never even really came out and said what it was, but we all knew what it was. Yeah. And I'm out. I'm like, oh my God, the Queen is dead.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, John.
Yeah, John. Who? He's not one to wear the ribbon. That's the one.
You sold me a hair with a babka wrapped around it. You know, John, I told you before I love to cook. My husband actually calls me sometimes. We play a joke, the Soup Nazi, because I could literally take just about anything and make soups with it. I'm the Soup Nazi at my house. Still say it. No soup for you. You come back 1 year.
But have either of you ever had mulligatawny soup?
No.
The fact that you bring this up and then you mention mulligatawny, my best friend in the entire world, her and her son have a running joke that every Friday they have mulligatawny. That is their thing that they talk about. So it's pervasive in the fact that it made its way into our language and we must have been at just the right age for it to watch it and absorb it, because you're right. I remember so many of the points for a show about nothing. It definitely gave us something over and over again. It's
funny because you're Elaine, and I'm sitting here trying to figure out which one of us is George and who's Jerry.
Or Kramer. I don't know.
Well, he's got the hair to be Kramer. I'll take Jerry. You take Kramer.
I'd much rather be Kramer than George.
Yeah,
let me tell you, Elaine dances better than I do. So that's
not true. I've seen you dance in your social media. You do all right. The Kicks, though, that was a great episode. I mean, I honestly think we could go an hour and just do line after line after line. And the minute you start, I can finish. The early ones, the middle ones, talk about a show that ended at 10 years, I think, and it never jumped the shark until maybe the finale. The finale for me was the biggest disappointment. And I know where they were going. I love that they brought in every character almost. That was kind of neat. But it didn't work.
Didn't like TV Guide or someone rank it as like one of the worst television show endings ever? I think they did that with Dexter and Seinfeld and something else, as like you could have wrapped this up in so many ways, and this is one of the worst.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because so many other shows that ran that long actually did justice to their endings. If you look at like Friends wrapped up nicely, Cheers ended up with a great, very, sad kind of, sorry, we're closed. MASH had a great ending as well. Like, these shows that are iconic, and Seinfeld, even Frasier had a great ending as well. They just missed it. They missed it. But I mean, how many episodes did they do? 200, 250, maybe more than that. And so the last two weren't very good, but the other 248 were amazing.
There were pieces in it that were amazing. Like they're sitting in the jail. Spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't seen the last episode of Seinfeld, whatever. But like George is messing around with the button on his shirt, and it's like, he's like, why the second button's like in no man's land? And Jerry's like, haven't we had this discussion before? And it threw back to the pilot. because that was a conversation they had in the pilot. So there were pieces in it I loved. If they came back in 5 years, if the plan was, okay, they're in jail for 5 years, they come back in 2.5 and do a reunion, then I would have been like, all right, there was a plan. It just did not hit at all. But do you guys have a favorite episode?
I don't know if I have a favorite episode other than because I think so many of them made me laugh. I remember this Soup Nazi, the I'm Out, the George's puffy pirate shirt. Remember George's puffy pirate shirt?
Jerry's.
Jerry's.
Which one of you has you have a Christmas ornament, don't you, Chris?
I have the Christmas ornament of the puffy shirt. Yeah.
Yeah. And the hand model, there was just there were so many.
He's so excited going through the park with his gloves on, skipping through the park.
Or he gave up the supermodel because he looked down at her toe and she had really fugly toes. So he was like, "Yeah, I can't date her. That's disgusting."
Well, do you remember who George got compared to in the hand model episode? So I love that storyline. So they're like, we have not seen hands this pristine since, and then they name someone, and he's like, what happened to him? He's like, he became a victim of his own self-love, and his hands formed into a claw because he did that so often that he couldn't stop. And George goes, oh, you don't have to worry about me. I won a contest.
Yeah, that's right.
Now when you say that, like, okay, I fully recall the rest of the episode then.
And then in the finale, George going down in the plane screams, I cheated in the contest because he wanted to get that off his chest. So I love that they kept bringing it back. Yeah. So kind of like the running jokes we're starting to get here. I love when there's inside jokes that reward the loyal follower, but don't take away from the person that hasn't seen it.
What's your favorite, John?
My favorite episode is one that nobody probably remembers or loves, but I love well-written episodes that exhibit parallel structure, where they'll show one thing and then another. And then, so it's a scene where Jerry invites Elaine to come with him on a trip. And there's like a car rental scene where, Jerry goes off on the car rental person. But my favorite part of the episode is when they're on a plane and Jerry's talking in first class about how there's gardenias in the bathroom. And Elaine comes out of a bathroom that obviously someone just committed a very vile, disgusting act. Yeah. Because she's like holding her breath the entire time she's in there, and the guy's falling asleep next to her, and her bladder's gonna burst because she ends up with the wrong meal. Someone gives her a coach. It's just I laugh, and I know that if tomorrow that episode goes on Broadway and they're like, I need someone to take this part, I know every line of that episode from beginning to end. And it's a weird episode to like that, but I love that episode.
Yeah, I actually that one, my favorites, but that one was because that's when he says, anybody can take the reservation. Take. It's the holding of the reservation. Yeah. I love the Hamptons episode, and that's just an absolute classic. And then because that entire one, I can't stop laughing. Like even like with the what does the doctor say about the baby? Oh, he's very breathtaking. Oh, so
you gotta come see the baby.
Yeah, look at the baby.
And then we were of that age, Chris, you being single, we were of the age that our friends started having kids, and that was a thing. You had to go see their baby and say something nice. And I got to tell you, man, I've seen some ugly babies, and every time I do, I think of that episode. There was the bubble boy. There was the shrinkage. That had everything. I love that episode too.
You mentioned the button on the shirt, and it reminded me of one of my favorites, and I can't recall the name of the episode. But it was the one where George had the little pit dot on his lip. And the doctor looks at it and goes, I've never seen that before. He's like, never seen that before? And he's like, well, I have to take a bio. What a bio? What do you mean? Am I going to die? Well, I don't know. I've got to, we got to do a test. And then it's the whole negative is positive thing where he gets the call. Negative? Oh, no, I knew it. Why was this going to happen to me? And he's like, negative is positive? Oh, yeah.
And when you mentioned them going on a trip, all I could think of too was, and the audience at home can't see this. Remember when Jerry was scratching his nose on the side? They were all like, you. I wasn't picking it, whatever it was that he said.
He breached.
He was a scratch. He was a scratch.
I think that the one you talk about might have been the meat slicer with the biopsy, because Kramer had that meat slicer. He goes, I think I can get a piece of that.
Wasn't that when he and Newman were like dancing in the kitchen,
Making
making the sausage?
Newman. And Jerry, and the other thing is the never-ending stream of guest stars on Seinfeld, definitely not repeated anywhere else. I mean, no. Jerry's girlfriends were played by some of the biggest names in television, and they all left at some point or another. Every single one of them slammed that door on their way out. There was Marla the Virgin that was played by Jane Lee from Frasier. There was what's her name from Lois and Clark?
Well, Terry Hatcher.
Whose
they're
breasts
real and they're spectacular. Yeah,
exactly. So many. And I mean, honestly, part of me is like, I wish I could just do, okay, my 3 topics are Seinfeld, and Seinfeld, because easily we could have talked about this for an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioned the girls too, and she's like, you don't remember my name, do you? Mulva?
All right. Dolores.
Because he said it rhymes with a female body.
Yes. Dolores. Yeah, that's right.
Oh God, we could have done that. Yeah, we could have done this the whole time.
So the other thing I liked about it is the premise of it, and even when they make a pilot within the show they're pitching to the NBC executives is a show about nothing, and it's their show. But that premise, it was about everything. I literally George said it best. He goes, what'd you do today? And the guy expressed his day, and he goes, that's a show. And on the face of it, you're like, well, no, that's not a show. But then you go back to the fact that they did the Chinese restaurant episode in real time. That was a half hour they spent waiting for a table. And it was one camera angle the entire time, one camera on them, 30 minutes. That entire episode was shot in real time, or it played out in real time. And that's an episode, and we've all been there. But if you're like, oh, we're going to do an episode where it's just 30 minutes of people waiting for a table, you'd be like, no, well, what happens the next day? Or what happened to the day before? Or do you cut away to the parents at some point? You're like, no, you keep it on the 3 main characters for 30 minutes in the same location. That's the show. And that's one of my favorites. Seinfeld 4?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I and Elaine, I mean, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, just her delivery is amazing. And I actually, I mean, Chelle, you have to know, like, part of the reason that John brought up Seinfeld today is because Bette Midler, Wind Beneath My Wings, Bette Midler had 1 or 2 episodes in Seinfeld. So definitely one.
What part did she play?
She played herself.
Right, but why was she on?
She was in the softball game, and George ran over her.
Right.
And then,
But the softball team, so Jerry was dating the understudy for the musical of Rochelle,
Rochelle.
from Milan to Misk. And Bette Midler was in the starring role. And Jerry's girlfriend, that was the understudy, it was basically a Tanya Harding episode. They were going back. They were making fun of the whole Tanya Harding thing because she took out Bette, who was the star. I mean, even that, the fact that they could get away with that was unbelievable. And again, they didn't say it, but it was there.
Yeah. Amazing show.
Yeah. So John had to get some Bette Midler in. There you go.
I did.
I just wonder if there'll ever be, I mean, to me, when I think about sitcoms, will there ever be a Thursday night like Friends and Seinfeld? I mean, that's Think about how
Dude,
incredible
it wasn't just
that
Friends
was.
and Seinfeld. You got to go back. That lineup started with Cosby Show Cheers.
That's right.
It was must-see TV all the way through. And they would try different things. Mad About You came in to the rotation for a little while. They built that Thursday night lineup. We actually use the term all the time. Because before streaming, it was must-see TV. You either saw it or you waited till reruns. And NBC literally called their lineup that for years.
It's amazing, Seinfeld and Friends. And I think about Thursday nights too, just because one of my favorite shows in the 80s was Magnum PI, and that was Thursday nights before they actually started putting, I think that would come on at like 9 o'clock after 2 early sitcoms. But yeah, that Friends and Seinfeld, it's amazing. And I could talk about Seinfeld all day. We haven't even scratched the surface of what we could talk about there. I mean, Mr. Marbles, the Kenny Rogers.
So Elaine wasn't in the early ones. So at least the pilot, and maybe right after the pilot, there was a different character they were bringing in, trying. I can't imagine the show without her. When we were talking about putting together a podcast, I mean, honestly, it is 1,000,000,000% because of Seinfeld that the three of us are what I had in my mind. I mean it absolutely, truly, that you're the Elaine. And I absolutely thought of you when I thought of the podcast, and I thought this would be a perfect juxtaposition that you would embody the Elaine role. And Chelle, you were more like somebody else.
What? Oh God! Hey,
You
I
can
mean,
do worse than Elaine, Chris.
No, wait, that was delivered like almost Seinfeld level timing here. Like the way that you delivered that right there. I was like, oh, well, that's great. I'm the Elaine.
You are definitely
No.
Elaine, though. All joking aside, and that was an homage. It just works. It just works so well. The Rose Between Two Thorns, the Catalyst, the Girl Friday, you see it over and over, and it was done flawlessly on Seinfeld.
Agreed. And I'll take Elaine, but I am of the two dudes. I'm the only one that can do this and look like Kramer, almost like
You are right.
get my hair up as high as I can. And
hey, buddy.
I don't know.
All right, so we talked about Barry Manilow. We talked about Blossom. We talked about the epic, amazing, groundbreaking show about nothing that was Seinfeld. What are your thoughts, y'all?
I know the answer. I'm telling you, I know the answer. I'm going to let Chris go because I'm
go because I don't want to look silly. I just want to be able to say I know the answer too.
No. Go ahead, Chris.
I don't. I'm so. This is my problem with our show. I get so immersed in each segment, and my brain is like going on each one that I forget to think about how they all connect. Honestly, like I don't know. I just disappear into the time that we're talking about.
And I do that too, but I thought this one, and Chelle, how sure are you that you know?
I'm
Scale
about
of 1 to
95%.
90. So let me give Chris. So I'm pretty sure you know too. I can see it on your face. So let's see if we can give Chris a clue. Are you all right with that?
Uh-huh.
Why don't you? Do you have a pen there?
Yes, you want me to write it down to prove
I want
that
you to
this is
write down what you think.
Okay.
And then I'm going to give the clue, and then you reveal your answer, and we'll see if that's what it is.
I got it.
Ready, Chris? Here is a subtle clue.
Oh, well, the wind beneath my wings. Okay. I mean, I can only assume that Bette Midler has something to do with all three.
Chelle, what do you think it is?
You want me to
Let's see your
reveal what I
answer.
thought it was?
Reveal your answer. Oh, Chelle got it wrong.
No!
Yes, and I knew you were going to go there. That was my red herring. I threw a red herring in. So that, I love getting them. Oh, I love that you got it wrong. That was my red herring. My wife said the exact same thing. Tell the listening audience what you wrote, Chelle.
I wrote Jewish down. They were all Jewish. Jerry Seinfeld is Jewish, Mayim Bialik, and I was pretty sure Barry Manilow was too. So Jewish was my answer. And I was literally very...
That was my red herring. So Barry Manilow actually got his start with Bette Midler playing her. He was her piano player when they both started their careers together, singing and playing piano in the continental bathhouses of New York City. That's how Bette Midler got her career start. She literally played and sang in gay bathhouses with Barry Manilow. So when you were saying like, oh, it could be career ending if people found out he was gay, I'm like, do you all know how he started?
No, I did
Because
not know that.
if that was a closet, it was made of glass. Secondly, Maya Bialik, actually, and I mentioned this once before, one of her debut roles was playing the part that Bette Midler had in Beaches. She actually played young Bette Midler in the movie Beaches, which is why we brought up Blossom. And then finally, Chris, to your point, Bette Midler was actually in Seinfeld episodes. So I told you guys eventually there was going to come a time, for all the ribbing I've taken, that my connection is going to be Bette Midler and or Beaches, and I was going to do it in a way that you would never see it coming. And Chelle, I was so disappointed that you saw through me, but you didn't.
I literally, I was like, I think from like early on in the episode, I'm like, these are all Jewish. They're Jewish. I literally thought that from the beginning, and I thought, yeah, I got this one. My smug butt just got handed. I just got handed. What? I can't even think of the words right now.
So I got one thing to say to you, Chelle. Psych.
You know what? I'm out.
Now you said psych.
Oh my God, the queen is dead.
I love it.
I'm on your wife's side then.
Yep, my wife said the exact same thing. I'm like, good. That's what I want to throw them off, because the fact that I also brought up that she played, I'm like, I think they're going to see through it, and I don't want them to, because it's going to be a fun episode anyway. But I also want the surprise. I want that. And for those that maybe this is your first episode or you're watching out of order, this is one of those Seinfeldian inside jokes that runs through our podcast. We reference it more often than I would like, that one of my guilty pleasures is I can sing and know every word to Wind Beneath My Wings by Bette Midler. That is one of the songs that if alone in the car, I would shamelessly sing at the top of my lungs. And I said it once in passing, and these two idiots have never let me forget it.
I love it. I mean, I did not know obviously the other two connections to Bette Midler, but once we started talking about Seinfeld and I mentioned Bette Midler, I'm like, I wonder if there's a connection there, but I would have never been able to say that because I had no idea that the other two were connected to her at all.
When you mentioned Bette for the episode of Seinfeld, I should have put it together right then and there because I knew all about Maya Bialik. But I would have had trouble. I would have thought that would have been one of those things that I put together two pieces, but not the third, because I had no idea that that's how Barry Manilow got his start. So Bette Midler was a fan of Lowe. Is that what you're trying to tell me? Like,
or he was as big a fan of Bette as I am. And then the other piece is that even before Bette Midler was on Seinfeld, there's that episode, and I thought you were going to jump to this too, Chris. There's the Seinfeld episode following the contest, and it's a parallel episode where instead of being about the contest, it's that whole, you said it. Not that there's anything wrong with it. So while everyone in the world thinks that George, or that New York, that journalist, college journalist thinks that George and Jerry are a couple. And like all the things throughout the episode are making it look like they're gay. And for his birthday, Elaine gives Jerry a Bette Midler disc set.
That's
CD
right.
As a
That's
present.
right. Yeah.
And it follows. It follows exactly. And she's like, what? You like Bette Midler? And he's like, yeah, I do. And I'm like, it is. I'm Jerry. He likes Bette Midler.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah, I love it. I mean,
I'm literally like, I'm going to stew about this one. I'm going to be really, those moments in your life when you're like, you meet somebody and you're like, oh, I should have said this, if you're trying to get back at them or something. I literally would be mad at myself.
That's another Seinfeld episode right there. The jerk store called. They ran out of you. George was stewing over not saying it. Yep.
Yeah.
Sleepy
Yeah,
George.
because you can't come up with it. And I'm like, I did
But-
not come up with it.
Believe it or not, George,
George
isn't
at
home.
home.
I
Can you
love
do
that
the
one
rest?
too.
Yeah.
I love The Greatest American Hero, and then of course when they had his answer machine, he's just sitting there listening to it.
It took me forever to figure out what three pieces I could bring up and end. And I was like, do I do Bette Midler? Do I do beaches? And I'm like, okay, if I do beaches, maybe China Beach. But I'm like, if I say the word beach, if I even come anywhere near it, these two are going to be all over it.
Yeah. Even I would have been able to figure that one out.
Yeah. We're gonna film this next weekend, and I'm gonna bring it up because I'm gonna be still mad at myself.
You had this, to use an expression, shit-eating grin on your face. You were like, I own you this episode. I got it. And I'm like, all right, maybe it is more common than I acknowledge. I thought the first one was fairly well hidden. You know, we talk over and over and over again about that there's more than one connection. That pop culture is so pervasive that when you look, you'll find more. The fact that both of them were what they called standards singers, that they had a very specific type of, both of them did. There's a lot that connects all the way through. But the Jewish one, you gave me the idea about 4 episodes ago. You mentioned a red herring and throwing something out that would make it seem to, and I'm like, okay, if I can get them off track, I might succeed in having them not see this coming.
Well, you succeeded in getting me to name your red herring. That's what you succeeded in, for sure.
What did you think when the music?
You put me right upstairs for a marker, knowing all along
I
that didn't
didn't
even
want
happen.
you to be like, oh, I was right. I did not want to. I wanted proof positive that I could own forever that you were wrong.
Totally.
And you were like, when you went away for the pen, and John is like, she's in her office. Where the hell is she going for a pen? I'm like, she's like, you were like at the Scholastic book fair buying a pen before you came back in.
No, this is my basement.
Oh my!
And you
God.
reminded me, John, when you said psych, my mind went immediately to, I got some ice cream and you don't got none, want to lick? Psych.
Your dad's on welfare. You can't afford it. Dude, we are an entire generation made up of clips. All the shows we watched would have clip episodes that were amazing. The amount of stuff in my brain that I thought was just me. I'm such a weirdo. And then I start something and Chelle finishes it. She starts singing something, Chris jumps in. Maybe it's just the three of us. I don't know. Those watching, please let us know in the comment section. But it's something.
The chemistry. And that's what made shows like Seinfeld good in the first place. It was the chemistry of the characters. And I really do believe our chemistry here is very much like that.
I totally agree. And I always say this, like how fortunate I feel to be able to do this with you guys every week. And I wish that everybody had an opportunity to do something like this every single week. I think before we started the episode, Chelle was talking about how, the content creation that she does and that you do, John, is very isolating, because you're doing it on your own. You don't have, a cast of people. And I can say the same for me. Like what I do can be very isolating as well. The keynote speaking and the putting the presentations together, writing books. These are things that I have to do on my own, by myself. And so to be able to have this time with the two of you and everybody else who's listening and subscribing, we hope you're subscribing, of course. It's awesome. And it does bring back all of those. And so after we record, there's always like a million things that I wish I would have said, or thought about, particularly when it comes to Seinfeld. Like I still want to talk about 100 different episodes, but we only have a little bit of time.
There's certain topics that I think will come back. Like it'll just have to. There will come a time when Seinfeld will be a piece of somebody else's puzzle. Because of the vast amounts of pop culture, because of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon-ness of the show with so many people coming in and out of the cast of guest stars. It just is the way it is.
Completely agree.
Chelle, you were going to say something?
I was, and I lost it.
Good episode. So
yeah.
I could not be happier. Sometimes I want you guys to get it. This time I did not. So Chelle, you almost ruined my day, but instead you made my week.
Oh. And you ruined my day, my week. I'm gonna stew over this. I'm gonna be like, I need to do better.
I'm going to get a little piece of paper and just write the word Jewish on it. And every now and then, from this point moving forward, when you're a little smug, when you're acting a little too sure of yourself, when you're putting it off like you think you know everything, I'm just going to very quietly sit here without a word and just do one of these.
It's all right. Do it anytime. That's fine. That's fine. I can take it.
Well, listen, guys, as always, it has been more than a pleasure to spend this time with you and hopefully with a bunch of people that are discovering that we're never too old to look back and play together, reminiscing over the memories and stories that we all grew up watching, listening to, and just the best 3 decades in the history of the entire world. So for those watching, please remember to subscribe. We're coming at you every single week with episodes released every Wednesday at some point during the day. For myself, I just want to wish everybody a fantastic week and hope the new year is going well, because I assume this will show after the new year. This is John Catriti signing off, saying to everyone, have an awesome day.
See ya.
That's it.
Stay rad, everybody.
See ya.
Bye-bye.